So my guild just finished clearing the Heroic Sith raid, and I was going to make you guys a video of my impressions on the Sith raid, and what I think of it, and what teams I could recommend for it. However, there was some news that came with my guild clearing the Heroic Sith raid, involving Jedi Rey, some nerfs to her, and some changes to some mechanics in the raid, especially against Darth Traya. So it would be remiss of me to not talk about those, so let me talk a little bit about the Heroic Sith raid, what I think about it, and then we will tackle the issue of Jedi Rey, and some of these nerfs that are coming our way. So for this video, I typed up myself some notes so I could stay on target, especially with the nerfs for Rey and that stuff, because I want to keep on target, and right now there's a lot of hostility in the community, so yay, notes. But for the Sith raid, we cleared it last night, and we had to use the Stormtrooper Han method to clear it, which I will talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And my first impression is that the Heroic Sith raid is incredibly hard. It's not a level of difficulty I've seen in this game in quite a while, and I mean, even when we had the Heroic Sith raid, or the Heroic Tank raid at the very beginning, it wasn't as hard as this Heroic Sith raid is, in my opinion. But it's not exactly a bad hard, it's good in a way because it puts an extra emphasis on teamwork. You're not going to have one player who's going to solo the entire phase for you guys outside of the Stormtrooper Han method, which is going away next week, but it requires your guild to have a lot of participation, which is good. That means that you're not just having people who throw in their zeros and then completely forget about the raid. They are required to put in the effort to get those rewards now. They can't just sit by and grab some free rewards at the end. And this is my opinion, this is a very good idea, because now you don't have these people who are free riding, you don't have people who you basically require full participation in your guild. And you don't exactly need a Kraken-sized roster either. You do need very robust rosters, which is good and bad, but at the same time, having a diverse cast of characters is something that CG has always kind of stressed for a game like this, especially in things like territory battles and territory wars. The bigger roster you have, the more rewarding that things are going to be for you, because you're able to get more points, you're going to do better, you're going to help your guild more often. So having a diverse and big and robust roster is always good for something, especially now in the Heroic Sith raid. However, that's about it for good. The bad is that we are basically forced to use Jedi training Rey in the Heroic Sith raid, and this is bad because if you do not have her, you do not have a snowball's chance in hell of clearing this Heroic Sith raid. It's either you get Jedi training Rey, or you basically just don't have the ability to clear the Heroic Sith raid, and we basically had to use her to clear phases 1 and 2 because she's the only viable team really in those two phases. She does 5 or 6% at least with her teams in phase 1, and she can do about 3 to 4% in phase 2. And this, in my opinion, is a mixed bag, because it means that there are other teams out there that aren't viable in the Heroic Sith raid. They're not going to do as good as Jedi Training Rey, and it's not because Jedi Training Rey is too good, it's because the other teams just don't do well. So we do have the nerf coming in for her, which we'll cover here in a moment. Another bad thing I've noticed is that there are some bugs with the Heroic Sith raid, and especially a very glaring bug with Darth Sion in Phase 2. I noticed it when I was fighting with my Phoenix Squadron, and it's one of those bugs that you just kind of look at and you just wonder how this was never caught. So if you look here at the footage, you're going to notice that there's only a few stacks of Cycle of Pain out on the field, and according to the raid mechanics, each stack of Cycle of Pain, whenever Darth Sion uses AoE, will remove 2% turn meter. However, look at Kanan and Zeb, and you will notice they go from pretty full turn meters to 0. In other words, Darth Sion is removing all turn meter regardless of how many cycles of pain and suffering are out on the field. This is a huge glaring bug that I noticed in Phase 2, and it's one of those that you just kind of look at and you wonder, how on earth was this never caught in testing? So this is a huge bug for Phase 2, and it adds an even more infuriating level of annoyance to that phase, because Darth Sion is already a very tricky guy to get through. He hits incredibly hard, and now you're basically having your characters get all their turn rate removed all the time, and they just can't keep up, and it really destroys your score in Phase 2. So there's that. We had the bosses ignoring stealth, but now they've claimed that's an intended feature, which we'll cover again in a moment. But also, there are overtuned mechanics here. The stacking tenacity and speed are something that should not be in this raid. We already have incredibly high tenacity on these bosses, plus you'll notice they are level 100 in the Heroic Sith raid, and in the Heroic AAT raid they're level 85. So I think that we have a level cap coming at some point to help push us up to the level of the Heroic Sith bosses, because right now the level discrepancy between us is causing extra potency and tenacity issues when we're fighting those Heroic Sith bosses. And also, there are some teams that are featured in this raid, like your Sith, that rely on debuffs, and unfortunately right now, we can't use them because the bosses have such a high base tenacity already before we get the stacking tenacity, they can't apply debuffs. Darth Sion is next to useless in this Sith raid because he can't apply pain. If he can't apply pain, he can't use his Held by Hatred ability, he can't do damage, he doesn't have that bonus defense. If he can't apply that pain, he's never going to be able to basically work in this raid. So Darth Sion is a character that has almost no use now, especially since they've nerfed his unique in here. He pretty much just has no use in the Sith raid, and that's unfortunate because he is a brand new character that came featured with the Sith raid, and we cannot use him here. Now, the immunity tenacity down, some people don't like it. I will agree that that was needed because characters like Commander Luke and BB-8 were allowing us to basically destroy the tank raid so easily that the tenacity down was needed for this Heroic Sith raid. However, the stacking tenacity where it's 30% on tier 6 and lower and 50% on Heroic is something that should not be here. There should be no reason for that much tenacity stacking every time the boss takes damage. So with that level difference, like I said, level 100 on Heroic, and we're level 85 right now, I do think that at some point we are going to see a level cap increase, and I think that's maybe why these Heroic Sith raid is so hard right now, is because it is tuned to a player level cap increase that's coming here in the near future. So those are my impressions. Overall, it's hard. It's not exactly too hard. There are some overtuned mechanics that they do need to fix. There are some glaring bugs like that Darth Sion Terminator removal that absolutely needs to be fixed in order to make Heroic to be a comfortable level of challenge for us. And there is that extra emphasis on teamwork, which is good, but the bad is basically we rely too much on Jedi training Rey. There are the bugs like I covered, and the mechanics are overtuned, and they need to have some nerfs. We don't need the stacking speed and tenacity. It's already hard enough as it is. So those are my impressions of the Heroic Sith raid. Let's go ahead and go into my thoughts and opinions on the nerfs coming with Stormtrooper Han and other characters, and especially the nerfs to Jedi training Rey. Now, with the changes to the raid, the big thing is Bonds of Weakness will no longer trigger on damage effects. Like Stormtrooper Han's taunt, whenever he took damage, he would give 20% turn meter to his team. So that will no longer work. Death Trooper will no longer gain bonus turn meter if Director Krennic takes damage from Bonds of Weakness. Savage Opress will not gain turn meter. And the big one, which I found kind of interesting, was Darth Sion will no longer have his unique trigger from damage from Bonds of Weakness. Darth Sion, of course, being a brand new character that came with the Sith raid, and now he's nerfed for the Sith raid. So unfortunate, but it is what it is. In my opinion, the change was needed for Stormtrooper Han because it allowed you to basically clear the phase with one team. Granted, it took forever because your phone would basically try to crash with the 1000 Bonds of Weakness on your team, and you know, it ruins the whole teamwork aspect, and I get that. That I understand. I do think the mechanics are working as intended. However, like I said in a tweet a few days ago, which I think is pretty on point here, just because the game mechanics are working as intended, it does not mean it is working as the developers intended. And that's something to keep in mind here. Not trying to defend what's going on here, but putting out my opinion that sometimes we will not see eye to eye with the developers, and this could be one of those moments. Stormtrooper Han did need to be nerfed. We should not be able to solo a whole phase of a brand new raid with one character. We didn't get that until Commander Luke came out, and that was, what, a year after the Heroic Tank raid came out? So we should not be able to solo the raid so quickly with something like Stormtrooper Han. Now, there are some arguments here. Stormtrooper Han is the login character for the month, and it feels kind of, I don't know the word here, it feels weird having the login character for the month be nerfed for the raid that came out in the same month. So take that how you will. It feels kind of weird, and so it means that there's something coming with Stormtrooper Han, I guess, probably for the Han movie. But anyways, Yeah, it needed to be changed because we should not be able to clear a whole raid like this so early on, and it makes the raid feel outdated when it comes right out the gate. However, going into the next couple of things, bosses will now, when they enrage, will now they'll strip all buffs from your team and throw out an unresistible buff immunity, so your team will no longer buff. And this is coming from the team, the Night Sister Acolyte with Night Sister Zombie in Phase 4, that was be able to stay in stealth and Darth Traya could not target her. However, anybody who actually ran that team like myself could tell you it's not viable because you can maybe squeeze an extra 0.5% out of that team before Traya starts moving so fast that you just never move. You just never move. So I get it, but it's not really something that needed to be changed because it wasn't going to make your team suddenly like break the raid and solo the whole phase. Now, moving on to the big elephant in the room. With Jedi Training Rey, her exposed damage has been nerfed in the raid. It will be nerfed when the update hits next week, and this is a problem with the player base. So what's going on is, according to the developers, she is stifling other teams from becoming viable in the raid. As a result, exposed damage will be severely reduced in the Sith raid, and also a little bit in other raids. They have not said anything about Deathmark with Death Trooper yet. However, I don't think they will nerf that, because if they nerf the damage for Deathmark, we've pretty much lost any teams that are viable in the raid. So if they want to nerf Deathmark, good luck to them. I don't think that's going to be a good idea. Now, the problem with Jedi Training Rey is not that she's performing too well. The problem is other teams can't perform in the Sith raid, and it's because of the overtuned mechanics like I said before. Stacking tenacity means your Sith teams will not work in the Heroic Sith raid. They can never apply debuffs. Without debuffs, your Sith don't work. There's no point to using those teams in there. So Sith teams don't work. Any teams that rely on debuffs, your thermal detonator squads, can't work in Heroic because the base tenacity for your bosses is way too high. I know that the meme for that, but basically we can't apply debuffs. That destroys several teams out of the gate already. We need to have the fight. We need the raid to be a little bit lesser restricting on tenacity and such to make other teams viable. Jedi Train Rey being nerfed is not going to change any of that. This feels like an overreaction to players clearing the Heroic Sith raid within the first week of the fight. Granted, pretty much all but I think a handful of guilds out there have cleared it using the Stormtrooper Han method, but I think developers were not intending for us to clear the Heroic Sith raid so quickly, so they're looking at trying to nerf Jedi Training Rey to try and draw out the content a little bit more. In my opinion, that is not a good idea. That is a terrible idea, and I think that's not going to establish a lot of goodwill with the community in this area. No one was complaining about Jedi Training Rey being too good for the raid. They were complaining about Jedi Training Rey being the only team that was good for the Sith raid. It was never that she was too good and stifling other teams, is that the other teams cannot work. And I think the developers have missed out on this and overreacted by nerfing Jedi Training Rey. Another thing to note here, she is a hero's journey character, just like Commander Luke Skywalker. She is a very difficult character to farm. You need a legendary character with BB-8, and you need to get smugglers Han and Chewie up. And anybody who's used them can tell you those characters are terrible. We cannot find a use for them anywhere in the game. In fact, oddly enough, their on-damage uniques were just nerfed with the things that came with Stormtrooper Han. So they no longer even are able to be used in the Sith raid correctly. So we have no place to use those veteran smugglers except for the hero's journey for Jedi Training Rey. And now you're going to have players wondering, should I even bother with Jedi Training Rey? Because we see what's coming in with Darth Traya. We see that she is pretty much looking like she's going to destroy your Jedi Training Rey teams. So this is something that I think the developers need to pull back on. We should not be getting this knee-jerk reaction and this overreaction to nerfing Jedi Training Rey. I think the developers need to step back, re-examine things, and think about why the other teams aren't working instead of thinking why Jedi Training Rey is working too well. Those are my thoughts on Jedi Training Rey. I really think that we need to keep her exposed damage as high as it is. Also, the reason why Exposed is doing so much damage is because we have absurd health pools on these bosses. We have 50 million on them in Heroic Sith. That is a lot. And you have 150 million in some of the phases in Tier 6. That's why Exposed is doing so well, because the bosses have such huge health pools. Now granted, that's to help stress the extra teamwork, but at the same time, having the extra health plus the overtuned mechanics means a lot of your teams out there are not working well. So those are my thoughts on the Heroic Sith raid and also with what's going on with Jedi Training Rey. If you all have any questions or comments, drop them down below. If you all did enjoy this video, feel free to like, share, and subscribe. And to all of my McMinions out there, thanks again for watching, and I will talk to you guys later.